In this video, we have combined 5 most shocking and unforgettable true crime cases. In this true crime documentary, we uncover the shocking case of 25-year-old mom, Jessica Heeringa.
My name is Shelley. I'm here to talk about my daughter, Jessica Heeringa. She was abducted from Norton Shores, Michigan on April 26, 2013. Jessica was very loving. She was always willing to go that extra mile for anyone. She was a single mother raising a 3-year-old son. I would like to leave a message for my daughter. If by any chance, Jess, you can see this, I want you to know how much I love you. And I want you to stay strong and don't give up faith, because we will never, ever quit looking for you.
On April 26, 2013, Jessica Heeringa arrived at the Exxon gas station for her evening shift at exactly 4:35 p.m. It was supposed to be just another quiet night behind the counter. But that evening, something felt off to the people who loved her most. Her boyfriend made a stop at the station just to see her face and check in before the night dragged on. Not long after that, one of her close friends also dropped by, sharing the same quiet concern. They both hated the fact that she was working these hours completely alone. But there was something even more unsettling about the place itself. The gas station had no surveillance, nothing watching the entrance. It was just Jessica, a young woman working a night shift in a place with too many shadows and no witnesses. At around 11 p.m., a man pulled up to the pump just like any regular customer. But the moment he stepped out, something felt wrong. The station was empty. No one behind the counter. No sign of staff. He glanced around, thinking maybe someone had stepped out back for a smoke or a break. But as he circled the building slowly, that sinking feeling started to settle in his chest.
I had walked inside, there's nobody, there's a car here, there's another car out front, but it was very suspicious why there's nobody here.
Okay, so did you yell or anything, or?
Yeah, I hollered, hey, walked around the building. It's just, I don't know.
Officers arrived at the Exxon station shortly after the alert and immediately began their inspection. It didn't take long before unease crept in. A woman's jacket had been left carelessly behind. Next to it, a purse filled with nearly $400 still zipped shut. Nearby, a pack of cigarettes sat untouched on the counter. Nothing about the scene made sense. These weren't signs of someone leaving willingly. These were traces of someone who had been interrupted. Someone who never had the chance to finish what they were doing. Investigators quickly pulled the latest transaction. The final purchase had been made at exactly 10:55 p.m. A customer had paid for a cigarette lighter. Just 5 minutes later, someone was on the phone with emergency services, reporting that the station was completely abandoned. Something had shifted in those minutes. Then the officers stepped outside. That's when the weight of the moment truly hit them. On the pavement were faint specks of red scattered in a way that suggested something abrupt had happened. A battery cover from what appeared to be a laser sight was also discovered nearby. Its presence raised a disturbing possibility. But just as they were processing the shock, another disturbing detail caught their eye. The door that led to the red stain could only be opened from the inside. There was no handle on the outside. At first glance, it could have been a robbery. But if someone had come for money, then why was the cash untouched? Jessica's purse was still full. The station's register hadn't been forced open. There were no signs of anything missing. Whatever happened here wasn't about money. It was about her. After some digging, the officers identified the missing worker. Jessica Heeringa, 25 years old. She had vanished without a trace, and all they had were scraps. No witnesses, no surveillance. Just a growing list of questions, and a gas station that held its silence like a grave. In a desperate attempt to break that silence, police began knocking on doors and asking neighbors if they'd seen or heard anything unusual. But no one had answers, at least not yet. What they didn't realize was that their questions would trigger something bigger than expected. Word of Jessica's disappearance began to spread beyond the station. It moved through the neighborhood, reached unexpected ears, and when it landed at the feet of the station manager, she decided to come forward with a statement that would change everything. She explained that around the time Jessica was last seen, she had been passing by on her motorcycle. What she saw made her circle back. A silver van pulling around to the back of the station. At first, she admitted she thought something shady was going on, Her mind even wandered to the idea that maybe Jessica was sneaking merchandise out the back. She said she slowed her bike to see more clearly. That's when she saw the figure standing at the van's rear. The back hatch was wide open. The person shut it quickly, then opened it again, as if they were adjusting something or someone, then closed it once more. The manager never saw Jessica, never heard a scream, but something about the way the van pulled off moments later stuck with her. The driver was a man wearing a red or maybe orange sweatshirt. His hair was wild and disorderly. He never looked her way, just drove off into the night as if he had finished what he came to do. She said she didn't report it at first because nothing seemed obviously wrong. But now, with Jessica missing, her silence didn't sit right. After the investigators took the manager's testimony, something finally shifted. For the first time, they had a solid lead. Whoever had taken Jessica was most likely a man driving a silver minivan. It wasn't much, but it was the first real thread they could pull. So they turned to the surrounding surveillance footage, hoping that maybe some nearby businesses had captured what the station itself could not. And they got lucky. One camera had caught the image of a Chrysler town and country moving through the area around the time Jessica vanished. It was just moving in and out of frame, like a shadow. Based on the manager's description, this was the only vehicle that matched what she saw that night. But just when the investigators felt like they were getting closer, the reality of the task hit them hard. Because in Michigan State, where over 15,000 vehicles of that exact model were registered, at least 5,000 of them were silver. How could they find one specific van when the roads were crawling with identical ones? The spark of hope they had found dimmed fast. Still, they pushed forward. They kept canvassing the area, hoping that some small, overlooked detail might surface. And then it did. A woman came forward with something the detectives had never expected. She said she had stopped at the station just the day before Jessica disappeared. While chatting with her, she brought up how unsafe it was for her to be working alone so late at night. Jessica agreed, said she hated the isolation. But before either of them could finish the conversation, someone nearby overheard them and cut in. He told the woman not to worry, that Jessica wasn't really alone, that her customers would protect her. But the way he said it wasn't comforting. It was off. The energy in that moment changed, and both women stopped talking immediately. Unlike the station manager who hadn't seen the man's face, this woman had looked him directly in the eye. She described him in detail, his clothes, his hair, his unsettling tone. Based on her memory, a composite sketch was drawn and quickly distributed to every search team in the area. The net was starting to tighten. Teams were still looking for Jessica everywhere, but now they weren't just searching for her. They were also hunting for the man who claimed she wasn't alone. Days turned into weeks. Weeks bled into months. And still Jessica was nowhere to be found. And the man they are looking for also vanished. The case that once set an entire community on edge had slowly drifted into silence. Leads went cold, witnesses disappeared, and eventually her name slipped from the headlines. By the end of that year, the investigation was classified as inactive, a file gathering dust with a photo of a young woman who had simply vanished.
Where is your emergency?
We come up to this lady. She's laying in the road. I think she was hit by a car.
Okay.
She's got a head injury.
In the summer of 2014, roughly 20 minutes away from Norton Shores, where Jessica had last been seen, a woman named Rebecca Bletch was found lying motionless in the middle of a quiet road. At first, the neighbors who discovered her assumed she had been struck by a passing car. Her body was twisted, her breathing shallow. It looked like an accident. But what investigators found when they arrived told a much darker story.
Police say the victim had been shot 3 times in the back of the head and reveal that she suffered bruises to her wrists, hands, back, and leg. It's not clear what caused the bruises. Bletch was still alive with a weak pulse when neighbors found her on Automobile Road not far from her home, just after 6 in the evening on June 29th. She died a short time later. Investigators say they also found 3 .22 caliber shell casings near her body.
Rebecca had not been hit by a car. She had been attacked. 3 gunshot wounds to the back of her head, bruises across her wrists, on her hands, her back, her leg. No one could say what caused the bruises. No one could explain why she had ended up on that road. It was just past 6 in the evening on June 29th. She was still alive when neighbors spotted her, but the damage was beyond repair. She died shortly after they arrived. Near her body, officers discovered 3 shell casings from a .22 caliber weapon. The working theory was that it may have been a random attack, a jogger caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. But there was something about the details that left investigators deeply unsettled. And what no one could shake was the proximity. 2 women, both attacked in small towns near Norton Shores. One vanished without a trace. The other left for dead on the road. Could it really be a coincidence? Or was someone out there watching, choosing, planning? Yet just like in Jessica's case, there were no witnesses and no cameras. 3 years had passed since Jessica vanished from that gas station, and 2 years had gone by since Rebecca's lifeless body was discovered on that quiet stretch of road. But in April of 2016, something happened that would crack everything wide open.
Okay, we're gonna get out there, okay? Stay in a line with me, okay? Stay in a line with me. Who has a gun? Okay, so the guy's not there?
Stop.
Is it the female? Who was it?
I don't even know him. I'm just, please let me know, right now, please let me know.
Okay, the officer's right around the corner, okay?
He was 6 years in his 40s.
And was it a minivan? Like a full-size van?
Yes.
And you said he was about 40 years old?
Thank you so much. What'd you say?
I said, what color hair did he have or anything?
Dark.
Dark hair?
Yeah, he has a
Was it a white male or a black male?
white.
You weren't able to get a license plate or anything, were you?
No.
A 16-year-old girl was walking home from a party late one night. She'd taken a wrong turn and gotten lost. Streets she didn't recognize, no phone, no one around. Then a silver minivan pulled up slowly beside her. The driver leaned over and asked if she needed help. She said she didn't want a ride, not from him. But she did ask if she could use his phone to call someone she trusted. He agreed. She got inside, and that's when everything changed. The moment she stepped in, he slammed the van into gear and sped off into the dark. The road blurred past her as he pulled out a firearm and pointed it at her chest. She panicked, fought. Then in a moment of instinct, she threw herself from the moving van. Bruised and shaking, she ran to the nearest house and banged on the door until someone let her in. She was safe, but the man in that van had vanished again. The police got there fast and she didn't hold anything back. The police pulled surveillance footage from nearby homes and businesses, and when they did, they saw something that made their hearts stop. The vehicle caught on camera was a silver Chrysler Town, the same make, the same color, the same van last seen circling the back of the gas station on the night Jessica disappeared. But this time, the police managed to narrow down the list of suspected vehicles from 15,000 to just 11. They then showed the girl photos of the car's owners, and without hesitation she pointed to one man. His name was Jeffrey Willis. With that confirmation, police moved quickly. Search warrants were issued. They raided his home. They searched his van. And what they found was really a nightmare. Tucked away inside the van were multiple syringes pre-filled with what appeared to be an insulin. But that wasn't all. There were handcuffs, a rope, a ball gag, even pills typically used to enhance male performance. The items weren't random. They painted a picture about someone who had planned every detail of what he wanted to do. Then they found the weapon, a .22 caliber firearm. Ballistics testing confirmed. It was the exact same firearm used in the killing of Rebecca Bletch. The bullets matched, the casings matched. But there was one final piece of confirmation that chilled the investigators more than anything else. The handgun was missing the battery cover on its laser sight, the exact same part that had been found outside the gas station 3 years earlier. There was a catch, though. The serial number on the weapon had been deliberately removed. Someone didn't want it traced, but investigators weren't done. They managed to recover the serial digits, and what they uncovered added a new layer of horror. That gun had been reported stolen by a co-worker of Jeffrey Willis, someone who worked with him at the same factory. Yet it didn't end there. Inside his house, things spiraled even further. His personal computer revealed disturbing material. content that featured both women and underage individuals in contexts that were deeply alarming. But the most unsettling discovery wasn't just what was on his screen, it was how he labeled it. One folder stood out, titled simply VIX. Inside were subfolders named JLH and RSB. To anyone else, these letters would mean nothing. But to investigators, those initials hit like a sledgehammer. Jessica Lynn Heeringa, Rebecca Sue Bletch. The folders held photos of both women, news articles, case coverage. It was as if he was archiving their stories, keeping them, owning them. Then came the password. One of his computers was locked behind a code. When investigators finally cracked it, their blood ran cold. J4L27H13, Jessica's initials, and the exact date she vanished. If there was any doubt left, it ended there. Jeffrey Willis was arrested, charged with the kidnapping and disappearance of Jessica, charged with the shooting of Rebecca, charged for the attempted abduction of the teenage girl who unknowingly brought his empire of silence crashing down. And that wasn't the end. He was also named a suspect in another case, a student from Fruitport High School, a case that had gone cold since 1996. Now the question was no longer whether he did it. It was just how many others were out there. In a turn no one saw coming. Just 1 month after Jeffrey Willis was arrested, another name suddenly emerged from the shadows. His own cousin, Kevin Bloom, a Michigan prison guard who had no idea that his own words would drag him directly into the center of 2 unresolved cases. During questioning, Kevin made a statement that sent shockwaves through the investigation. He claimed that one day Jeffrey called him and told him there was a gathering at his place. But when Kevin arrived, it wasn't a party he walked into. He said he saw Jessica lying unconscious on the floor, without clothes and visibly injured. According to Kevin, she had already been harmed severely, wrapped in a sheet, and later buried somewhere no one could find. But just as quickly as he gave that statement, he withdrew it, said it wasn't true. But the damage had already been done. He was charged with 2 counts of providing false statements to investigators. And with pressure mounting, Kevin finally broke. He entered a guilty plea on both counts. The court sentenced him to time served. But that wasn't the end of his involvement. As more evidence came to light, another charge was filed. On November 27, 2017, Kevin pled no contest to a far more serious allegation. He admitted to helping his cousin Jeffrey dispose of Jessica's remains. This made him an accessory after the fact. For that role, he was sentenced again to time served. But this time, he also received 5 years of probation and was ordered to wear a GPS tracking device for no less than 1 year. Meanwhile, the clock continued to tick on the other side of the courtroom. Jeffrey Willis had already been convicted in the case of Rebecca Bletch. He had been sentenced to life behind bars with no possibility of release. While Rebecca's family poured their pain into their victim impact statements, Jeffrey Willis turned his back. He requested to leave the courtroom, and before stepping out, he blew them a kiss as if mocking their grief.
And I don't disagree with that.
As for Jessica's case was still hanging in the air. The man believed to be responsible was already in prison, but he hadn't yet been convicted for what happened to her. In May 2018, 5 years after Jessica Lynn Heeringa vanished from that quiet corner gas station, her case finally made it to trial. It had taken years of silence broken only by fragments of evidence and one unshakable belief, that Jeffrey Willis was the man responsible for what happened that night. Despite the absence of a body, prosecutors came to court with a case built on chilling patterns and disturbing digital traces. They revealed that Willis had visited the Exxon station more than 15 times before the night Jessica disappeared. He wasn't just passing by. He was watching, studying, waiting. On the night Jessica vanished, Willis was supposed to be at work, but factory logs confirmed he never showed up, and the records pulled from his phone told their own story. His location placed him near his grandfather's house, just minutes from the gas station. Right around 11 p.m., the exact time Jessica was last seen. More damning than his movements were the files recovered from his computer, folders filled with pictures of Jessica, archived news coverage of her disappearance, footage, both staged and real, depicting abduction and torment. It wasn't just what he collected, it was what it revealed. The prosecution argued that Willis waited until the station was quiet, then took Jessica from the rear of the building, brought her to his grandfather's home, held her against her will, then ended her life. The defense denied everything, claimed there was no physical proof, no direct connection between Willis and Jessica's vanishing. They pointed out that the van caught on surveillance footage could have belonged to anyone, that there were over 15,000 similar models across the state. But the jury wasn't swayed. After just an hour and a half of deliberation, they returned their verdict: guilty. Willis was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But even in that moment of long-awaited justice, the pain remained. Because even after all the trials, all the headlines, all the evidence, one thing was still missing: Jessica's body. Her remains have never been found. And for her family, that courtroom victory will always be shadowed by the one truth they still don't have. In the end, Jessica Lynn Heeringa was not just a missing person on a poster or a name whispered in courtrooms. She was 25-year-old mom, a daughter to Pete Jenkins and Shelley Heeringa, a sister to two young women who still carry her memory in every room she should have walked through. Those who knew her spoke of someone smart, someone kind, someone who tried her hardest, no matter how difficult things became. In her early 20s, she gave birth to her son Evan. That little boy became her world. And even though her relationship with his father Dakota had its struggles, he never stopped saying she was a good mother, a present one, a loving one. Jessica worked night shifts at the Exxon station in Norton Shores, not because she wanted to, but because she had to. When her fiancé lost his job, she stepped in to keep their small family going. She stood behind that counter alone through the darkest hours of the night so that her son could have a better life during the day. But she dreamed of more. Hidden in her journals were plans to go back to school, to study, to become an accountant. She wanted a career, a future, not just for herself, but for Evan. She believed in change. She believed that tomorrow could be better, and she was willing to fight for it. In this true crime documentary, we uncover the shocking case of Taylor Pomaski.
I love it. Thank you much.
You can look at the next bag. After food here. So there is one other bit of news then. So with putting us up in a house, you won't need to.
What?
We're moving back. That's why I'm here. I've negotiated it.
On the 26th of April 2021, Stephen Pomaski waited for a call that never came. It was a Monday. The kind of day his daughter Taylor would usually check in just to say she was okay and ask how everyone else was doing. She was the oldest sibling, the kind of woman who carried the weight of her family with both pride and tenderness. But that day, silence replaced her voice. No message, no call, just stillness. Concern quickly turned into unease. Stephen reached out to Leslie Mandeville, Taylor's mother, hoping maybe she had heard from her instead. But Leslie hadn't. Not a word. That's when she decided to call her daughter. She assumed Taylor would give her a simple excuse. Maybe say she got caught up with work or needed space. Taylor had a habit of pulling back sometimes when things got overwhelming. But when Leslie dialed her number, she was met with something they weren't used to. Taylor's phone was off, and that alone felt deeply wrong. Leslie didn't waste time. She called Kevin Ware Jr., the man Taylor had been living with, her boyfriend, her partner. Kevin's voice on the other end of the line was unsettling. He sounded strange, detached. When she asked if he had seen Taylor, he claimed he hadn't. Not since April 25th. That was 2 days before this very moment. Something about the way he said it didn't sit right. Leslie called the authorities, not just to report her daughter missing, but because Kevin's voice echoed with something off. Something more than just confusion. That night, officers arrived at Leslie's home to collect her statement. By morning, they were already in Spring, a quiet suburb tucked inside Harris County, Texas, knocking on Kevin's door. What he told the investigators only deepened the shadows. According to Kevin, Taylor had stormed out during an argument they had on April 25th. It happened at a house gathering. Friends were there. Tension rose. She left in a hurry, left her dogs. But then, as he claimed, a car pulled up. A vehicle filled with men. She got in, drove off, disappeared. On the surface, the story seemed ordinary. A disagreement between a couple. A woman choosing to walk away. Taylor was 29, old enough to make decisions, old enough to disappear on her own terms. That's what the investigators thought, at least in the beginning. But when they circled back to Leslie and told her what Kevin had said, her reaction shifted everything. She didn't deny they fought. What she couldn't accept, what made her voice crack and her face pale, was the suggestion that Taylor would abandon her dogs. That part was unthinkable. To anyone who knew Taylor, her loyalty to her animals was absolute. She never left them behind. Not once. Not ever. Maybe it sounded like a mother's dramatics, but the detectives started to think differently. If Kevin hadn't seen Taylor for days, why didn't he contact her family? Why didn't he call the police? The only answers that made sense weren't easy ones. Maybe they had truly separated that night. Or maybe he didn't call because he already knew where she was. Or worse, he didn't need to ask. As investigators tried to untangle that night, thinking that maybe these early answers might shed light on Taylor's disappearance, they had no idea that this case, the quiet exit from a house in Spring, was about to evolve into one of the most jarring and complex mysteries the state of Texas had seen in years. More than 4 days had slipped by since Taylor Pomaski vanished, and yet inside the Pomaski family home, the tension was only building. Not just because their daughter was still missing, but because someone who should have been at their side, who should have knocked on their door or stood with them in their grief, never came. Kevin Ware Jr., the man who claimed to love Taylor, never showed up. Not once. All he did was call her mother and promise that he would use every connection he had to bring Taylor back home. It sounded generous. It sounded noble. But to Leslie, it felt rehearsed. There was something hollow in his words. Something that echoed more of image than intention. Kevin wasn't just a man. He was a former NFL athlete, a name recognized in the neighborhood. But instead of rolling up his sleeves and searching, his call came off more like a performance than a plea. It didn't feel like someone fighting to find a partner. It felt like someone desperate to protect a reputation. The family's instincts all pointed in the same direction. Something about Kevin wasn't right. But what none of them expected was that the investigators were beginning to look in a new direction altogether. Through a digital trail buried in Taylor's emails, the detectives found a name: Eric Zuliger. A message from Taylor had been sent to him just moments before she disappeared. In that email, she told him she needed to see him urgently, and that one detail aligned disturbingly with Kevin's earlier claim, that a car with several men had pulled up, and she left with them. If Eric had gathered a group and come to see Taylor that night, it could explain why others were involved, especially since Kevin, a man standing over 6 feet tall and weighing more than most, wouldn't be easy to confront without backup. Just like that, suspicion shifted. Kevin's story began to make a strange sort of sense. Eric now became the new focus. But what happened next surprised all detectives working on the case. When contacted, Eric Zuliger didn't hesitate. He came straight to the station. He showed them the email Taylor had sent. No one had even asked him to. When they asked about his history with her, he didn't dodge or dramatize. He said they had been in a serious relationship for 6 years. They had broken up, but it was mutual, and they had stayed close friends since. What he said next cut through the room. Eric described Taylor's relationship with Kevin as deeply unhealthy. He said she had confided in him about Kevin's behavior, that he had a reputation for reckless living, that he struggled with substance issues, that he had been suspended from his league career due to violations. And Eric wasn't just talking. He had proof, texts, screenshots, messages that showed Taylor had made it clear. She was preparing to leave. She told him she was ending things. She was ready to move out of Kevin's house for good. Usually when an ex-boyfriend speaks poorly of the new one, it raises suspicion, but not this time. Because Taylor's family confirmed every word. They had seen the signs. They had read the same messages. They too believed that Taylor and Eric had remained close and respectful after the breakup. Now detectives found themselves back at the start. Kevin's story needed a second look. But this time, they weren't just going to listen to him. They wanted to hear from everyone who had been there on the night of the party. And when they did, they uncovered the first real crack. Several guests said Taylor hadn't looked well. Her face was pale, she seemed weak, and after a loud fight with Kevin, she went upstairs. That was the last time anyone saw her. No car, no crowd of men, just Taylor walking up the stairs and disappearing into a silence that would outlast the night. Worse than the contradiction was the quiet. Most of the guests, when asked for details, spoke with unusual restraint, like they were hiding something, like there was a truth too dangerous to tell. It was in that moment investigators stopped calling it a disappearance. They started calling it something else, something far more troubling. The case was handed over to Detective Stephen Campos, who made a personal promise to Taylor's family that he would pursue every lead and do everything in his power to bring her back. But what Campos didn't know then was that someone else had made the same vow, someone who had turned personal loss into purpose. His name was Tim Miller. Founder of Texas EquiSearch, a nonprofit specializing in locating those who have vanished, Miller joined the effort with his team. They searched ditches, fields, rivers, neighborhoods. They left no corner unchecked. But as the days became weeks, it became painfully clear to everyone involved. Finding Taylor wouldn't just be hard, it might already be too late. For more than 5 relentless months, Texas EquiSearch and the close friends of the Pomaski family refused to let the silence win. The search extended across over 100 miles. The effort wasn't just about distance, it was about heart. About a family new to Texas, still finding their footing in a state far from where 5 generations before them had called home. Fort Lauderdale, Florida. But no matter how far they reached, or how many voices joined the call, the result remained the same. No answers, no trace, and no Taylor. Just as despair began to settle in, something shifted quietly inside the Harris County Sheriff's Office. Investigators decided to widen the circle. They crafted a public appeal, urging anyone with any knowledge, no matter how small, to come forward. And through that call came a detail so strange it cracked open a new line of suspicion. A woman stepped forward. Someone who had been romantically involved with Kevin Ware Jr. during his time with Taylor. She claimed that not long after Taylor vanished, Kevin gave her a strange gift, his own dog and Taylor's dogs too. That revelation clashed violently with the story Kevin had told Taylor's mother. He had said Taylor took the dogs with her, which is against what he told the investigator in the first day. But now the dogs had resurfaced in the arms of another woman, one with intimate ties to him. This contradiction might have seemed minor to an outsider, but for investigators, it was a breach in the armor of Kevin's version of events. If he told Leslie that Taylor left with her animals, but those animals ended up in someone else's home, what else had he twisted? What else had he covered? As law enforcement prepared warrants to search Kevin's home, phone, and vehicle, the case took a sudden, almost cinematic turn. On June 11, 2021, Kevin was arrested inside a shopping mall. Not for anything related to Taylor, at least not directly. A week before Taylor vanished, he had been caught in possession of banned substances and a loaded item he wasn't legally permitted to carry. He was initially released after his bail was reduced from over $100,000 to just $23,000. But then he broke the terms of his release. And that's what brought him back into custody. While Kevin sat inside Harris County Jail, unaware of what was unfolding beyond those walls, investigators moved forward. They combed through his home. They checked his car. But nothing they found inside the walls of his property directly pointed to Taylor's disappearance. No hidden items, no personal effects, no physical evidence. What investigators didn't realize at the time, what no report or warrant could predict, was that Kevin's arrest would set off something none of them expected. The moment he was placed behind bars, people around him began to talk. Friends, acquaintances, even those who had once protected him with silence. It was as if the illusion had finally cracked. And now the truth was slipping through the seams. The first revelation came from an anonymous caller to the tip line, a man who claimed he had been at the house the night of the party, the very night Taylor was last seen. According to him, Kevin wasn't just drinking. He was under the influence of substances that dulled his judgment and amplified his rage. He got into a heated argument with Taylor, one that escalated violently. The witness said Kevin didn't just raise his voice, he raised his hands. And then came the moment no one could ignore. When others in the room tried to calm him, to pull him back from the edge, Kevin reached for something hidden, a weapon. He held it up and looked them in the eye, saying, and here the man quoted him directly, "If anyone has a problem with the way I handle my business, let me know. I'll put a round in your skull." Not long after the first tip, another call came in that would change everything. A man, a former friend of Kevin's, said he had recently visited a shared acquaintance who owned a rural property. And there, on that property, he had seen the scorched ground of a recent fire. In the center of that charred earth, he noticed something deeply unsettling, a large bone that didn't look like it came from any animal. When he stepped inside the farmhouse, he saw something else, a skull. While investigators rushed to verify the location and gather a search team, the lab returned their first real breakthrough. Kevin's phone records showed a call made just hours after Taylor vanished. The number belonged to the owner of the very same farm where the bone was discovered, the same man the tipster had named. On December 14th, 2021, officers raided the farm. What they found left even the most experienced speechless.
It's found during the search for a missing spring woman.
What we have learned about the investigation into her disappearance.
Thank you for joining us. I'm Keith Garvin.
And I'm Christine Noel. 29-year-old Taylor Pomaski has been missing since April. KPRC2's Michael Lepardi is live at the Harris County Sheriff's Office tonight with new developments in this search. Michael?
Well, the sheriff has not released a lot of details yet. He says those remains still need to be identified, but investigators believe they're related to the case. Tonight, a possible break in the search for 29-year-old Taylor Pomaski. The Harris County Sheriff says remains were found in the northern part of the county as part of the investigation into her disappearance.
The medical examiner has determined that they are human. With the information in the investigation and everything, we're certainly optimistic it's Taylor, but now we'll just have to wait for positive identification.
Tim Miller is founder and director of Texas EquiSearch, which played a role in the search. He told us he couldn't share the location yet.
That's property that somebody does live on, about 1.5 acres, and again, I don't think that we're totally done with that area yet.
The sheriff's office says Taylor was last seen in April. Right now, the sheriff says investigators are unclear on the identity of the remains, but believe them to be related to her case. The sheriff didn't go into detail, but said the location was identified during the ongoing investigation.
Thank God they got information out there, good enough information to go ahead and obtain a search warrant. They got the search warrant, and, here we are today.
The sheriff is encouraging anyone with information on the disappearance to come forward as the investigation is still ongoing. Now, back in June, the sheriff's office told us that Taylor's boyfriend was one of several people they were questioning who interacted with her before her disappearance. I asked for an update on that today and if that has changed, but have not yet heard back. Reporting live downtown, Michael Lepardi, KPRC 2 News.
But it was now the job of forensic specialists to provide two answers. Was this Taylor Pomaski? And what exactly had ended her story? Detectives now had tangled narratives from Kevin, a timeline full of gaps, conflicting accounts, a farm that held answers, a witness who had seen the unseeable, and remains that, if proven to belong to Taylor, would turn a story of vanishing into something far darker.
Happening today, jury selection beginning this morning in the trial for ex-NFL player Kevin Ware Jr. on drugs and weapons charges. ABC 13's Charlie at City Live in Montgomery County. As we remember Charlie and many around the nation know Ware for being separately charged with murdering his girlfriend Taylor Pomaski.
Yeah, Jacob, that's exactly right. And it's important to note the difference between the charges here. Today's trial is regarding the drugs and weapons. The other case regarding the murder charges, that is separate and out of Harris County. So today's trial is set to begin in just a couple of hours. And this really is the latest development in what has been several months of legal problems for the defendant, Kevin Ware. And so once again, today's trial is regarding drugs and weapons. And it all stems from an incident that occurred back in April of 2021. Ware was pulled over for speeding, allegedly going somewhere around 115 miles an hour. When a deputy searched his vehicle, a loaded AK-47 along with other guns and drugs like cocaine and meth were allegedly found inside the car. Ware is a convicted felon and was charged with possession of a firearm by a felon and possession with intent to deliver or manufacture controlled substances. And so Ware was out on bond for this incident when his 29-year-old girlfriend, Taylor Pomaski, disappeared from his spring home. Ware is now charged in her murder over in Harris County, accused of brutally murdering her and burning her body, which was later found a few months later in a ditch in North Harris County.
Confirming the identity of the remains took longer than anyone had hoped. The bones were in poor condition. Months of exposure and the intensity of the fire had damaged nearly every trace. It took over 2 months of forensic testing before DNA results confirmed what everyone feared. The remains belonged to Taylor Pomaski. With that, Kevin Ware Jr. was formally charged with intentionally ending her life. But even with this major breakthrough, a single question remained unanswered. How did it happen, and when? Witnesses had testified that after a heated argument with Kevin during the house party, Taylor went upstairs. No one had seen her after that, not a single soul. Investigators had spent months trying to get Kevin to talk, to say anything beyond denial, but he maintained his story. He claimed he had nothing to do with what happened to Taylor, that he loved her, that he would never harm her. What Kevin didn't realize was that he had already revealed the truth, not in an interrogation room and not to someone he trusted, but to a woman he had spent just one night with, a stranger, someone he had invited into his world while under the influence of substances that dulled his inhibitions and loosened his grip on secrets. According to her sworn statement, which was later included in the official court filings, Kevin had been lying beside her, high and euphoric, when he opened up in a way that was both chilling and matter-of-fact. He told her that on the night Taylor disappeared, after she went up to her room, he followed. They argued again. He shoved her into the bathroom. Then, he struck her repeatedly in the head and ended her life by force. Once the guests had cleared out, he wrapped her in silence, carried her to his vehicle, drove to a remote farm, and set everything on fire. With that single confession, told in a moment of vulnerability and recklessness, investigators finally had the missing link. They had conflicting timelines. They had physical remains. And now they had someone who could describe the final moments of Taylor's life in terrifying detail. But they still needed one thing, a confession, from Kevin himself. When confronted again, Kevin stayed the course. He denied it all. He claimed the woman was lying, that the witnesses had misheard, that he was being targeted because of his past. But the evidence was too strong to dismiss, which is why the case was handed to one of Harris County's sharpest legal minds, Prosecutor Samantha Necht. She knew Kevin's background, his pride, his career, his arrogance. So when she entered the room to face him for the first time, she didn't waste time with sympathy or explanations. She played the game the way he would understand it, like a challenge on the field. "I'm going to play a match with you," she said. "You've got 30 minutes. That's the offer. You plead guilty and serve 30 years, or you take your chances in court and spend the rest of your life behind bars." Then she left the room. Kevin sat in silence. 20 minutes passed. He spoke with his attorney, measured the odds, weighed his ego against the reality. And finally, for the first time since Taylor vanished, he folded.
Also new at 4, a former NFL player will spend 30 years in prison for murdering his girlfriend and tampering with her body. Kevin Ware pled guilty today in Harris County to the 2021 murder of Taylor Pomaski. Court documents say that he hit her with a blunt object, strangled her, then dumped her body in North Harris County. Her remains were found 7 months later. Ware was a tight end for the 49ers and Redskins and had attended Klein Oak High School.
The disappearance of Taylor Pomaski wasn't just a case of someone vanishing. It was a slow unraveling of secrets, betrayals, and moments of silence that spoke louder than any words. Behind every unanswered call and every broken alibi, a darker truth was waiting to surface. Taylor was a young woman with a full heart and a future she never got to live, a woman whose trust was placed in the wrong hands. What Kevin didn't realize is that justice doesn't burn with fire. It doesn't disappear with lies. It lingers, and it waits. And in the end, it caught up to him. Not because he confessed to the law, but because he couldn't control his own darkness. Today, Taylor's name lives on, not as a tragedy, but as a reminder that those who hide the truth may escape for a while, but never forever. In this true crime documentary, we uncover the shocking case of April Millsap.
The person you are trying to reach is not accepting calls at this time. Please try your call again later.
This is the trail where it happened almost 3 months ago. Around this time of day, about 5:30, this trail right through the heart of Armada. I can tell you tonight, police have 3 witnesses. One is a classmate of April. All of them were out here. And many people in this small village knew both of these, the young gal and the man charged tonight.
Feeling a little bit more safer and that April's family will have justice.
I believe April would have fought back. I've always taught her to kick a guy in the right place. Run as fast as you can.
On July 24th, 2014, April Millsap took her dog Penny out for a walk around 6 p.m. It was a normal thing for her. She often walked Penny in the evenings. Sometimes her boyfriend Austin would join, other times one of her parents would go with her. The route was familiar. It usually took her about an hour to finish. She wasn't exploring somewhere new. There was no reason to worry, at least that's what everyone thought. An hour passed, then 30 more minutes. Still no sign of April. Her mom Jennifer started to feel something building in her chest. A quiet fear, but not yet panic, not enough to call the police. She started with phone calls, April's friends, then Austin. Maybe April ran into someone, or maybe plans changed at the last second. Jennifer tried to convince herself that everything was fine, that her daughter would walk through the door at any moment. Yet while she was holding on to hope, someone else walked through the door. It was Austin. He had come to the house, feeling the same way Jennifer did. They both continued calling friends. But then Austin looked down at his phone, and everything changed. He saw an unread message from April. It had been sitting there since 6:30 p.m., just 30 minutes after she left. It read, "I think I almost got kidnapped." Jennifer read the message. Her voice cracked as she called April's father. Then she called the police. And in this moment, what had started as a peaceful walk had now turned into something else. Something dark and terrifying. While officers in Armada were informed that April was missing, a patrol car had been dispatched to her home. Only one other police unit remained in the quiet streets of the town, because in Armada, incidents were rare. Some weeks passed without a single call. Crime here wasn't routine. It wasn't expected. The officer in the second unit had already started expanding his search area, scanning corners and alleyways, trying to spot anything unusual, but then a second call came through. It directed him toward a remote spot on the edge of town. A call that arrived less than 3 hours after April's family first contacted police. The voice on the line reported something no one was ready to hear. A young girl had been found, and she was no longer breathing. It became clear that this day would be different. Armada's silence had been broken.
911?
We just found a body along the mountain bike trail.
Is it a male or a female?
Female.
About how old do you think she is?
I didn't get that close.
Okay. Is she on the trail?
No, she's off of the trail, tucked back into the woods, her clothes are all taken off.
When the unit arrived at the reported location, they found a man, a woman, and a dog. The dog was enough. The officers knew right away who it belonged to. Everyone in town knew each other, and every officer in Armada knew April. They also knew her dog Penny. The question now was, how did they find her? And more importantly, was there any chance she was still alive? The second question didn't need a medical examination. It was clear April wasn't coming back. The officer turned to the couple and asked them to explain exactly what happened. They said they had been jogging along the same trail when they heard something break the silence, a strange sound in the otherwise still air. At first, they couldn't quite tell what it was. Then they recognized it. As they moved closer, they saw a black dog pacing nervously. There was a leash dragging behind it, but no one was holding it. No one was in sight. The woman tried to calm it down, tried to grab the leash, but the dog pulled away. It ran from them, then paused, turned, and looked back, as if asking them to follow. The couple moved after it through a dense bush, and there, everything changed. In that thick, shadowy part of the trail, they saw something pale. At first, it looked artificial, like a mannequin thrown away in the woods, but it wasn't. It was a girl, and from the size and build, they knew she was young. The man pulled out his phone and called 911, Within minutes, the wooded trail turned into a swarm of uniforms. April was found lying on the ground with no shoes on. Her clothes were wrinkled and pushed out of place. There was no doubt she had resisted fiercely. Signs of struggle covered her body. But what caught investigators off guard were the strange impressions on her face and neck. Not the kind of markings they were used to seeing. Not slashes or cuts, not bruises from fists, or scratches from branches. These were different. These were shoe prints, pressed into her skin, stamped in rage. Someone had stepped on her to silence her completely. In a town like Armada, where danger was a distant thought, this kind of brutality felt surreal. The medical exam confirmed the worst. April had suffered 48 separate injuries, each one a reminder of how long the attack lasted, how deliberate it was. Investigators feared the motive might have been perverse, but no signs of violation were found, which only added to the complexity. April had resisted and fought until she had nothing left, and even in her final moments, she stopped the attacker from doing what he came to do. But in the end, he still took her life, and left behind a scene too cruel to understand. The local police department wasn't built for this kind of case, so they called for support, people who had seen this kind of thing before. They began where most stories like this begin, with the people who knew her best. Was there anyone in April's life who might have held a secret? And quickly one name began to surface, not because he had something to hide, but because of how close he had always been. Her boyfriend, Austin. Why was he the last person to get a message from April? And more importantly, why didn't he respond right away? Why did he wait until he got to her house to read it? When the investigator sat down with Austin, it wasn't easy to get a conversation going. He was barely holding himself together, and from the start, it was clear they weren't sitting across from someone dangerous. Not the way he collapsed into his emotions, but there was still a problem. They had reports that April and Austin had recently been in conflict. The relationship wasn't stable. There were arguments, and that meant one thing. They couldn't let him off the hook just yet. So they asked him, "Why didn't you open April's message when she sent it? Why wait? Why read it only after everything had already happened?" Austin gave them an answer they hadn't expected. These detectives were from outside Armada. They didn't know how unreliable cell service was in town. Messages often arrived late, or didn't go through at all. Austin hadn't seen the message at 6:30 p.m., because he hadn't even known April tried to contact him. The first time he saw it, he was already at her house, sitting beside her mother. Still, investigators needed proof. They checked with the network provider, mapped out the cell towers, looked at the exact time the message was sent, and the time it finally hit Austin's phone. They confirmed everything. It arrived nearly an hour late, and April had sent it from an area with poor signal strength. But there was more. Austin had something they hadn't expected. An alibi with video evidence. He had been helping a friend earlier in the evening, then met up with others. And by 7 p.m., he was on surveillance footage at McDonald's ordering food. There was no way he could have been on that trail. But now, they were left with nothing. No suspect. No physical evidence. No trace of anyone at the scene. April's body revealed no usable DNA or fingerprints. It was as if the person responsible had vanished into the woods, without leaving a single mark behind.
A 14-year-old April Millsap remains on the loose tonight. April's body was found near the village of Armada in Macomb County. 7 Action News investigator Jonathan Carlson shows us how the community came together today to support her family.
Well, police telling me today that they have no new leads. This as people stepped up to help. In Armada today, this gas station on 32 Mile Road donating gas revenue and car wash cash to a fund in April Millsap's name.
I wish we didn't have to do this, but but at the same time, I'm glad we're helping out.
Owner Ted Jabori says Armada High grad Victoria Day came up with the idea.
We're just trying to help the family.
They saw a steady stream of cars today ready to donate.
Just wanted to support it. I've been following it on the news, and I hope they find out who did this.
More than $1,000 has been raised so far to help with Millsap's funeral costs here. They hope to raise more before it was over. Money well spent.
Yeah, exactly.
Living in Armada, we live in a very small town, and when something tragic happens, we all have to come together as a family, and that's what we are, and I'm very blessed to live here.
I happened to run into April Millsap's mom, Jennifer, today. I asked her how she was holding up. She said okay.
Until one detective, following a quiet instinct, made a decision that would change the entire investigation.
Yeah, Glenda, Stephen, we have seen scores of federal agents in groups of 10, 20. I want to show you what they've been walking through all day. Tall grass like this, crops for days. They've been taking baby steps, trying to uncover every inch. So the question now is, why did these agents come back again?
The media had picked up on movement. Detectives were back near the scene, searching, but no one could understand why. Why return now? What were they hoping to find? But the truth was they had every reason to keep quiet, because what they were looking for wasn't just another clue. It was the one thing that could finally break this case open. The digital team had been working nonstop. They were trying to get a report of the phone's movements from the cell phone provider, the same phone that had vanished after she was found. After combing through a wider radius, the device was found, less than a mile from where her body had been discovered. From that moment, everything shifted, but not for the reason you might expect. There were no shocking messages, no secret calls, no last-minute texts. Instead, what told April's story was something far quieter, a simple app, running in the background, tracking her steps. She had downloaded weeks earlier, with no idea it would one day speak for her when she no longer could. That app revealed a timeline no one could ignore. At exactly 6:30 p.m., April's movement suddenly shifted. The app monitoring her steps recorded a clear spike in speed. It wasn't a normal change, not a faster walk. She was trying to get away. The data suggested she was still on foot, but pushing herself hard. Likely running, but soon that speed doubled. And then something didn't make sense anymore. The numbers crossed the limit of human capability. It was no longer April running. The pace recorded was more consistent with a vehicle or motorcycle. Then, after just a few minutes, everything stopped. No motion at all. Detectives mapped it out. The first surge in movement came moments after April sent the chilling message to Austin. The second surge wasn't her. It was the person who took her phone. The pause in between, roughly 10 minutes, was most likely the moment where everything unfolded. Then the phone moved again at vehicle speed before it was tossed away, nearly 1 kilometer from where April's body was found. The trail was narrow, too tight for any car, but perfect for a motorcycle, and this aligned with what people in town were starting to say. After the case hit the news, witnesses came forward. Multiple residents reported seeing April walking beside a man middle-aged, dragging a motorcycle alongside her. It was blue and white. He wasn't riding it, he was pushing it, as if they were together. And strangely, she didn't look afraid, at least not in that moment, not to anyone watching. Detectives now had their first clear lead. They had a description, they had a motorcycle, and they had witnesses. All they needed was a name. 3 days had passed since April was discovered, and then detectives pulled into a quiet neighborhood, where a blue and white motorcycle sat parked right outside a modest home. They knocked, and when they asked about the bike, the homeowner didn't hesitate. It wasn't his. It belonged to a friend. His name, James Van Callis, 32 years old, living in Wales Township, just over 30 kilometers from Armada. The detectives didn't wait. They headed straight to Wales and brought James in. He didn't resist. He was calm and cooperative. He told them he had nothing to do with what happened to April. Said he had an alibi, that he'd been with a friend at the time, but detectives weren't buying it. That kind of alibi was weak, too easy to fabricate, too easy to manipulate. They needed something real. So they asked about his shoes. April had been found with distinctive marks on her body impressions that told a story. If they could find the shoes, the whole picture might come together. James handed over every pair he owned, but none matched, not even close. Still, investigators couldn't shake the feeling. Something about him felt off. Then they looked deeper, and what they found made everything worse. James had a record, not for violent offenses, but for break-ins, for ignoring court orders. But that wasn't the worst part. When they dug into his background, they uncovered something far more disturbing. His father, James Van Callis Sr., had a dark past. He was a registered predator known for targeting minors. His name had been flagged more than once, and his reputation in the community was something people whispered about, but never said out loud. To the detectives, this wasn't coincidence. It was a pattern, a bloodline soaked in bad decisions. Yet they focused back on James Jr., because the man seen with April wasn't an old man. He was middle-aged. Eventually, both James Sr. and Jr. were arrested on unrelated substance charges.
This is breaking news from the 7 Action Newsroom.
We are staying on top of the latest developments as a raid linked to the murder investigation of an Armada teenager leads to 2 arrests.
But at least for now, those arrests are tied to an illegal drug operation. 7 Action News reporter Simon Chickett joins us live from Armada. What have you found out about the raid and any connection to the murder, Simon?
Stephen and Carolyn, so much breaking news happening today. 2 arrests, 2 searches, and the work is still far from over. Michigan State Police tell us 2 people are under arrest for an illegal marijuana growing operation they discovered after raiding a home near Armada. The FBI and Michigan State Police raiding the home in connection with the murder investigation of 14-year-old April Millsap.
It's quite shocking. Quite shocking.
The aerial footage seen here is of a home on Marquette Road in Goodell's, Michigan. We know one other location also searched today. Agents and troopers here seen taking bags of evidence out of this house all day long.
It's very upsetting to know it's right down your road.
Millsap's body was found late last week off a popular bike trail near the center of Armada, where she was from. She'd been walking her dog when she disappeared. Still no cause of death has been released, and state police have been asking for the public's help. It's been a few days since a sketch of the possible attacker was released.
But the real purpose behind that arrest was the search warrant. Detectives needed to get inside the house. They needed to find the shoes. If they found them, this case would lock. But what they found was nothing. No shoes or fibers or even a trace of April's DNA. Even the motorcycle was scrubbed clean top to bottom. No fingerprints or foreign material. But something felt wrong. The bike unnaturally clean. Experts noticed evidence of bleach and powerful chemicals used to erase whatever had once clung to the surface. The police were stuck. Everything they had was suspicious, but there wasn't a single piece of evidence. Until out of nowhere, help came from the one person James never expected, his girlfriend. She remembered something that didn't feel right, something that stuck in her head ever since that day. James had come home, and the first thing he asked for was hand sanitizer. She watched him scrub his motorcycle, then his helmet, and then his black and white sneakers. That was the moment investigators sat forward. Because in all the shoes James had handed over, none of them were black and white. She told detectives she never saw that pair again. They were gone that night and never returned. Those shoes could place him at the scene. They could be the key, and he had erased them. But James made one mistake. One the internet doesn't forget. When detectives went through his social media, they found a photo of him wearing those same black and white sneakers. Detectives couldn't get his original pair, but they managed to find the exact same make and model. When they compared the impressions from April's body to those shoes, it was a perfect match. Still, they needed more. They pulled James's phone records. The location history told its own story. At the exact time April was trying to get away, James's phone pinged from the same trail. Then CCTV from a nearby road showed a blue and white motorcycle speeding past, heading away from the area moments after her phone went silent. This was enough to prove he was there, enough to show what he had done. In October 2014, James Van Callis was arrested.
In cooperation with the Armada Police Department, Michigan State Police, Macomb County Sheriff's Department, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation, today we announce charges against James Donald Van Callis for the murder of April Dawn Millsap in the city of Armada. Specifically, Van Callis is charged with 3 counts. Count 1, first-degree premeditated murder. Count 2, felony murder. Both counts are punishable by life in prison without parole. And count 3, assault with intent to commit sexual penetration, a 10-year felony.
James Van Callis Jr. was officially charged with first-degree murder, kidnapping, and assault with intent to violate. He denied everything and pleaded not guilty to every count.
People versus Van Callis.
Ready, Your Honor.
The courtroom held its breath as the trial began. The prosecution went first, and they weren't pulling any punches. They argued that James had been hunting for a target, not randomly, but intentionally. They found his search history pointing to an obsession with teenage girls. And on that July evening in 2014, he found exactly what he was looking for. A young girl who was alone and vulnerable, trusting enough to walk beside a stranger, but smart enough to try and get away. The state said he lured her in. Just a man with a motorcycle making small talk. But when she resisted, when she saw through it, he snapped. He used his helmet as a weapon, beat her and dragged her on that quiet trail where she used to feel safe. The defense pushed back. They said James was innocent, that someone else had done it, that there was no DNA, no fingerprints, no confession. The jury deliberated. For hours, people held their breath. Would a man like James really walk free because he knew how to clean up after himself? But when the verdict came back, the courtroom went silent.
Count 1, first-degree premeditated murder. We find the defendant guilty.
Count 2.
Count 2, first-degree felony murder. We find the defendant guilty. Count 3, kidnapping. We find the defendant guilty. Count 4, assault with intent to commit sexual penetration. We find the defendant guilty.
Okay, the deputy will take the verdict form from you. Have a seat, please. Mr. Sheik, would you like to have this jury polled?
Yes, Your Honor, I would.
Guilty. James Vancalis Jr. was convicted of the murder of April Millsap. And even now, years later, he still says he didn't do it. Still says he's innocent. April Millsap was only 14. She was kind, smart, and had a lot of dreams. What happened to her on that quiet summer evening shattered a town, broke a family, and reminded everyone that sometimes the danger isn't in the dark, it walks beside you in the daylight. James Vancalis Jr. thought he could erase every trace, wash away every mistake. But April's voice found another way to speak. In every step she took, in every second she ran. Justice caught up with him, not through blood or DNA, but through technology persistence and a trail he thought he could bury. April didn't deserve what happened to her, but her story, her strength, and her final steps brought a predator to justice. In this true crime documentary, we uncover the shocking case of Morgan Fox.
She was such a good and generous person. It's like, who would she make so angry to kill her? You know, she wouldn't do something like that.
2 days after Morgan was killed, a vigil was held outside of her home. You can still see the flowers and candles. Megan says she's deeply disturbed because she believes the alleged killer showed up at that vigil and even posted pictures on that same Facebook page.
I think a really sick person, somebody who's really messed up in the head and likes to see people in pain.
October 28, 2020. That day began like any other day for Morgan Fox, though few could have imagined how quickly that morning would spiral into something no one in Marion County would ever forget. She was used to rising before the sun, pulling herself out of bed in the deep stillness of night. At 1 a.m., she moved through the house in silence, made herself a quiet breakfast, got dressed for another early shift at FedEx, and stepped out into the cold air of pre-dawn. She opened the front door, unaware that this would be the last time she would ever cross that threshold. By 6 a.m., Jason, her boyfriend, stirred awake, expecting Morgan to already be gone and well into her shift. But something felt off. When he looked out the window toward the driveway, the shape of her car was still there. Confused, he picked up his phone and dialed her number while stepping out of the house with concern growing in his chest. As he walked closer, he heard the faint vibration of her phone echoing from somewhere near the car, a sound that didn't belong to the rhythm of that morning, and then the quiet shattered. Jason reached the vehicle, and what he saw froze his body in place. Morgan was motionless, slouched in the driver's seat, her legs limp and hanging out the open car door. The rain had not yet stopped falling, but Jason barely noticed. He could only stare at the unnatural position that told him something was deeply wrong. He called her name over and over, a desperate chant, in the hopes that she would move. But there was nothing. In that moment, he knew something irreversible had happened. He called emergency services as the rain painted streaks across the driveway. When authorities arrived, they moved carefully through the scene, taking note of every mark and splash in the mud. There were tire tracks skidding violently near the curb and thick streaks of dirt across the nearby fence, suggesting that someone had fled in a hurry. Morgan's phone was on the ground, her purse still resting where she had left it, and no trace of anything taken. No scattered casings, no signs of theft, only precision and intent. It wasn't a theft gone wrong. It was something colder, something planned. From this moment forward, the story would no longer be about a young mother on her way to work. It would unravel into a chain of revelations that would shake a community and force everyone to ask, How well do we really know the people closest to us? And more importantly, how close should we ever let them get? Morgan's body was quietly taken from the scene as the rain continued to fall and the morning bled into daylight. Investigators wasted no time because they understood that in cases like this, every hour without a lead was a step further from the truth. But they were working with almost nothing. No visible motive, no missing items, no eyewitnesses, just a phone that had fallen near the car. A digital trail was all they had left to follow. They hoped something within that small glowing screen would speak for Morgan. When Morgan's parents received the call, no parent should ever hear. Everything around them seemed to collapse. Her mother, Cindy, had spoken to her only a day before. The sound of her daughter's voice still echoed in her memory, and now that voice was gone. There was no warning, no time to say goodbye, just an abrupt end that made no sense. Bob and Cindy stood in the wreckage of disbelief, trying to comprehend how someone so full of life could be taken in such a cold and calculated way. The family cried out for answers, because no one understood how this could happen to Morgan, who had never done anything to deserve such an ending. And in the early hours of the investigation, one name rose quickly to the surface. Jason, the man who had found her, the man who had made the call, and perhaps the last person to see her alive. It wasn't personal, it was protocol. But the detectives were paying close attention. Jason's 911 call was strangely composed, his voice steady, almost too steady. While he did sound distressed, there was something about the tone that raised quiet suspicion. He was living in the same house. He was the first one on the scene. He had motive because as the investigators dug deeper, they discovered that the couple had been arguing in the weeks leading up to the tragedy. But interviews are where stories unravel or tighten, and Jason's version of events did not bend under pressure. He spoke with clarity, his emotions were raw and unfiltered. He cried and begged them to find out what had happened. His hands were tested and cleared for any trace of residue, and with each passing hour, the suspicion slowly faded. By the end of the first day, the detectives knew they had been looking in the wrong direction. If it wasn't Jason, then who else could have been close enough to do something so deliberate? That was when they opened Morgan's phone. The device became their roadmap, and they began tracing every recent call, every exchange, every name in her messages. One conversation stopped them cold. It was dated October 8th, a message sent by Morgan to Jason. In it, she described a disturbing moment at work, where a group of male co-workers had gone through her personal photos without permission. Her words were filled with discomfort and frustration. It was not just a complaint, it was a warning. Jason confirmed the story, saying Morgan had been deeply upset about what happened, and that it had caused noticeable tension in her workplace. That revelation shifted the direction of the entire case. If Morgan had been made uncomfortable by colleagues, and if she had raised concerns that were never properly addressed, then someone in that workplace might know more. The trail now led straight to FedEx. Investigators moved quickly. They needed to speak to every man who had been around her, but what they were about to discover within those walls would take the investigation into a realm they hadn't been prepared for. Because the truth they were chasing had roots deeper and darker than anyone had first imagined. Detectives began peeling back the layers at FedEx, starting with a conversation with the site manager, who didn't hesitate to confirm that Morgan had recently endured an uncomfortable situation involving 3 male co-workers. The investigators didn't waste a second before diving into the personnel files of those men, hoping one of them might lead them closer to the truth. And soon enough, one name stood out. There was something about this man that made the detectives pause. It wasn't just instinct, it was paperwork. Records showed he had previously been warned for inappropriate behavior toward another employee, and that man was a 29-year-old named Jason McDermott. The details surrounding this Jason were admittedly murky, and yes, it made things confusing, since Morgan's boyfriend also shared the same name. But what set this one apart was far more than just coincidence. All that was known for sure was that McDermott lived in Jackson Township and had worked alongside Morgan at the FedEx facility. But the people who spent time around him saw something more than just a name. There was an energy about him. Co-workers whispered about how strangely drawn he was to Morgan, and while she seemed to treat him as nothing more than a casual acquaintance, someone she might chat with during shift changes, or thank politely when he brought her breakfast. He appeared to see their connection through a very different lens. Things took a sharper turn after the phone incident. Jason had written Morgan an apology letter shortly after, and though on the surface, it might seem like a remorseful act, the company took it seriously enough to issue him a warning and made it clear that any further boundary crossing would cost him his job. It may sound extreme to some, but no one outside that situation knew what the letter actually said. And sometimes what seems like an apology can carry undertones that are anything but innocent. According to what the detectives could reconstruct, this obsession began about a year before the incident. McDermott was immediately drawn to Morgan the moment they met. He began small with breakfast offerings and brief conversations, which Morgan accepted with her usual warmth and kindness, unaware of how those moments were being interpreted. Eventually, she extended a polite invitation to him and other co-workers for a casual gathering at her house, something friendly and harmless. But the people around her noticed something that sent quiet ripples of concern. Jason's behavior during the gathering wasn't just awkward, it was invasive. He tried to wedge himself into every conversation and acted overly familiar with Morgan's family, even going so far as to call her grandmother Grandma, as though he had been part of the family for years. Still, at that point, nothing had happened that could be classified as overtly dangerous. That changed on October 8th. Morgan had left her phone unattended at work for a few moments, and in that small window, Jason McDermott took it upon himself to unlock it and begin scrolling through her personal photos. No one knows for certain how he got the password, and that's a question that continues to haunt this case. What is known is this: he not only invaded her privacy, but also saved several private images and shared them with two other co-workers, turning a personal violation into a collective act of betrayal. When Morgan discovered what had happened, she confronted the men directly. She was angry. She demanded answers and made it clear that they had crossed a line that could never be repaired. Jason returned the phone and offered yet another apology, but something between them had irreversibly changed. From that moment forward, Morgan kept her distance. She did not see a future where the two of them would share anything more than uncomfortable proximity at work. But then on October 24th, just 4 days before the attack, Morgan received a text from Jason McDermott that chilled her. It read, "How is Columbus going?" A casual question on the surface, but one that carried a deeper concern, because at that time, Morgan was in Columbus, visiting her family, and she had not shared her location with anyone. She told him, "How do you even know about that?" It was a question investigators would later circle back to again and again. When they reviewed all the messages and spoke with co-workers, a picture began to emerge of a man who was not just infatuated, but consumed. And then something else caught the attention of investigators. On the night Morgan was attacked, Jason McDermott arrived at work through the back door at 2:58 a.m. Not his usual entrance, not his usual time. He stayed until 10 a.m., and according to those working with him, he appeared completely normal, as though nothing had happened at all. But the detectives didn't buy it, so they picked up the phone and summoned Jason McDermott for an interview. What they were about to hear would take the case in a direction far darker than anyone could have expected. When Jason McDermott sat down for his interview, there was no hesitation in his words, no panic in his voice, only calm, calculated responses that left investigators with more questions than answers. He denied having any emotional attachment to Morgan, said she was simply a friend, nothing more, and admitted that at one point he had confused his admiration for her as something deeper, but quickly claimed that those feelings had faded and no longer held any meaning. The detectives didn't dance around the truth. They asked him directly if he had anything to do with what happened to Morgan that morning, and he responded with a firm denial, even going so far as to hand over his phone without resistance. But when the investigators reviewed his phone records, the results were inconclusive. The location data showed that Jason's device had been idle at home from the evening of October 27th until exactly 2:48 a.m. on the 28th. It looked like he had never left the house. But to the detectives, this raised a darker possibility. What if Jason had left the phone behind on purpose? What if he had planned the whole thing in advance, knowing that his digital footprint would be the first thing anyone checked? That kind of manipulation would take preparation and cold intention. So they kept digging, and soon they uncovered a small but significant detail that made everything feel heavier. Before Jason had even been called in for questioning, the police had gone to his parents' house where he was staying and saw his vehicle parked in the driveway freshly washed. Now, under normal circumstances, cleaning a car would mean nothing, but that particular day had been soaked in rain. So why would anyone wash a car that was already being rinsed by the sky? Unless, of course, they weren't cleaning dirt. Unless they were washing away something much more damning. When asked about this, Jason claimed he took his car to a nearby wash after his shift on the very day Morgan was attacked. Surveillance footage confirmed his story. He had indeed been there, but what caught the investigators off guard was how he behaved while cleaning the vehicle. Jason spent an unusual amount of time scrubbing the rear tires, making not one, but 2 passes over them with deliberate effort. Afterward, he drove just a short distance and parked in front of a local store, where he was seen walking slowly around the vehicle, inspecting it from every angle, looking side to side, like a man making sure he had missed nothing. And then came the detail that changed everything. The tire marks found in the mud near Morgan's car matched Jason's vehicle exactly. But it wasn't just that. A traffic camera positioned miles away had captured a car identical to Jason's driving toward Morgan's house at precisely 1:38 a.m. Then just under 40 minutes later, the same car was seen heading in the opposite direction. This narrow window between those 2 sightings fell squarely within the time frame of the attack. For investigators, it was like watching puzzle pieces snap together in real time. When they spoke to people in Jason's life, they all said the same thing. He was fixated on Morgan. He was desperate for her attention. He didn't take rejection easily, and he had been spiraling ever since she pulled away. But what made everything worse was what came after. Jason attended the vigil held outside Morgan's home, standing among her grieving loved ones, as if he belonged there. He didn't just show up. He made a spectacle. He wrote a long post on social media calling her Foxy, and pouring out emotions that felt staged and uncomfortable, a bizarre mixture of gratitude and grief, wrapped inside a tribute that no one had asked for. What made people recoil wasn't just the tone. It was the timing. Jason posted this while he was under investigation. He even used the hashtag Justice for Morgan, attaching a photo of her like he was mourning alongside the family, when in reality, he was the very reason they were mourning at all. Morgan's stepsister, Megan Barrett, didn't hold back. She called him out for what he was, a disturbed individual who seemed to find comfort in other people's suffering. Then came the final blow. When the full phone report was returned, investigators found hundreds of deleted photos of Morgan, many of them taken without her knowledge. Some were intimate. Some were from work, showing Morgan in moments she never knew were being watched. And they proved one thing beyond all doubt. Jason McDermott had been following Morgan, invading her life. The evidence was there. The motive was there. The obsession had long turned into something dangerous. All that remained now was the final piece. The one that would seal Jason's fate and expose just how far he had gone to make sure Morgan would never slip away again. Within just 1 week of that cold October morning, when Morgan's life was taken just steps from her front door, detectives moved swiftly, and on November 5th, 2020, they placed Jason McDermott under arrest. He was charged with aggravated homicide and ongoing stalking behavior, and was booked into Stark County Jail, where he remained under a staggering $2 million bond. The speed of the arrest sent a message, but it didn't silence the heartbreak. The news that a co-worker had been responsible for ending Morgan's life sent shockwaves through the community. Her story became more than just another case. It became a question, a reckoning. And everywhere you turned, there were people asking the same thing. Who was Morgan Fox? And how could someone so full of light fall into the shadows without anyone stopping it in time? Her name was Morgan Ashley Fox, born on August 22, 1991, to Cindy and Bob Fox, in the quiet stretch of Marion County, Ohio, where the fields ran wide and family meant everything. She was one of 13 siblings, a daughter nestled in a household where love came in abundance, but attention was something you had to earn. From the very beginning, Morgan was the kind of child who didn't make waves. She followed the rules, she excelled in school, and she had that rare ability to walk into a room and make everyone feel like they mattered. Her kindness was not performative. It was real. But life doesn't always unfold in perfect order, and when Morgan was still in her teenage years, she found herself standing at the edge of adulthood much earlier than most. She had fallen into a relationship with another young boy, and before long, the two learned they were going to become parents. While others her age were thinking about prom, or college, or road trips, Morgan was preparing for motherhood. And she didn't flinch. She embraced it with a heart wide open and a smile that refused to fade. 9 months later, they welcomed a baby girl named Amelia, known to most as M, a child who would become Morgan's whole world. Morgan never made it to college because responsibility came knocking first. And when it did, she didn't hesitate. She took a job at FedEx, not as a placeholder, but as a path forward. She worked hard, moved up slowly, and by the time this story truly begins, Morgan had become a manager of operations, a role that came with pressure and prestige, and everything in between. Somewhere along the way, her relationship with M's father ended, and she stepped fully into the role of single mother, a title that carried both strength and solitude. In July of 2019, a new chapter began when Morgan met Jason Scarnecchia, a co-worker at FedEx, and a single father himself, raising a young daughter not too far in age from M. It started simply with shared shifts and shared stories, the kind of bond that builds itself in quiet moments and hallway glances. By the following month, they were officially together, and within a year, they decided to merge their lives under one roof. In July 2020, they signed a lease on a home along Fraser Avenue in Plain Township, Ohio, a peaceful residential neighborhood filled with trees, front yards, and the hum of suburban life. It felt like the perfect setting for something new, a blended family, a fresh start. Morgan and Jason were building something that looked like stability. But as anyone who has tried to blend families knows, it's never as easy as it looks from the outside. They argued, they made up, they loved deeply. According to Jason, they were in a good place when autumn rolled in. Things were better, peaceful. They were working through the cracks and finally finding balance. But on the morning of October 28, 2020, under a gray sky heavy with rain, everything shattered. While the media focused on Morgan's life, the investigators were chasing something else entirely. They were not just looking at what had happened. They were trying to piece together exactly how it had been carried out. There was only one thing missing, the object used in the attack. It was nowhere to be found. But there was a clue buried in Jason's background that was hard to ignore. His father owned an extensive collection of firearms, enough to raise questions about where and how Jason might have gained access without ever leaving a trace. Investigators couldn't recover the item itself, but they had more than enough to see the pattern, to understand the intent, and to take the final step. Jason McDermott was formally charged and brought before the Stark County Common Pleas Court, where a trial began that would unearth every disturbing detail behind what happened in the early hours of October 28, 2020. According to investigators, Jason knew Morgan's schedule. He knew when she would be stepping out into the dark driveway to start her shift. In the early morning hours, he drove toward her house, parked somewhere nearby, and waited. He watched as she stepped out of her home, unaware that her final moments were seconds away. As Morgan climbed into the driver's seat, ready to begin another day, Jason approached, fired twice, and left her there, motionless. Then, as if nothing had happened, he drove away and headed to work. He arrived before 3 a.m., walked through the back door, and carried himself through the shift like it was just another Wednesday. He left at 10 a.m. and went straight to the car wash, where he carefully scrubbed every inch of the vehicle, focusing on the tires, where the mud had collected. Sometime afterward, he is believed to have opened his phone, scrolled through the gallery, and erased every image, every video, every trace of Morgan he had once hoarded in secret. On April 8, 2021, the verdict finally came down. After months of investigation, hours of testimony, and a community left shaken, Jason McDermott was found guilty of taking Morgan Fox's life. The courtroom was silent as the jury read the decision. 6 days later, on April 14, 2021, the sentence was handed down. Jason would spend the rest of his life behind bars, with no chance of ever walking free again. There would be no parole, no second chance. Before the sentence was handed down, Morgan's family stepped into the courtroom one by one, not to change the verdict, but to make sure their voices were heard by the man who had shattered their world. Among them was someone whose presence gripped the entire room with silence and sorrow. Emilia. Morgan's 9-year-old daughter stood before the court and faced the person responsible for taking her mother away. A child who should have been learning multiplication tables or drawing butterflies in notebooks was instead delivering a statement in front of strangers, under the weight of grief most adults couldn't carry. Her words did not tremble. She said, "I thought monsters weren't real, but you proved me wrong, and you hurt so many people. You hurt me, and the people I love." And for the first time since the day he was taken into custody, Jason McDermott showed emotion. It was not redemption. because Amelia had spoken the truth, and there was no way to hide from it. Morgan's father, Bob, followed with a statement of his own, his voice heavy with the kind of pain only a parent could know. He said, "I'll never get my daughter back. I miss her so much, I love her so much, and I am going to struggle for the rest of my life. So may you do the same, may you rot in hell." After the trial ended, the Fox family reached a civil settlement with FedEx for $4 million, a figure that meant very little to a corporation of that size, but carried the weight of a family's unanswered pain. Out of that amount, $1.2 million went to the legal team that fought for the truth. $2 million was placed in a trust to secure Amelia's future, and the rest was divided among Morgan's loved ones. But no amount of money, no settlement, no courtroom victory could erase what had been taken. Morgan was not a headline or a lawsuit or a case number. She was a mother, a daughter, the joy in her family's everyday life. Now a little girl will grow up in a world where her mother's voice is only a memory. Amelia will walk across graduation stages, pose for prom photos, and one day step into adulthood, never able to turn around and see her mother smiling back. There will be no more after-school stories, no morning hugs, no Sunday talks in the kitchen. Morgan should have been there for all of it. But because of one man's twisted obsession, she never will be. In her honor, the Fox family created the Morgan Ashley Fox Foundation, a voice for those who are silenced too soon. The foundation speaks out against workplace misconduct and aims to create real change, not just in policy, but in awareness, in accountability, and in giving people the strength to speak up before it's too late. This case was not just heartbreaking. It was a brutal reminder of what unchecked obsession can become. It showed us that silence is dangerous, that warning signs matter, and that sometimes the smallest boundary crossed can become the first step towards something unimaginable. In this true crime documentary, we uncover the twisted case of Nicole Vanderheyden.
Nicole Vanderheyden was 31 years old. She was living with her boyfriend, Doug Dietrich, and they had just had a baby together.
She was an absolutely amazing person.
Heather Meyer and her family say it doesn't seem real.
Terrible. Absolutely terrible. She's been extremely up and down, numbing pain.
On May 21st, 2016, in the quiet farming village of Bellevue, Wisconsin, two teenage boys, Tommy and Jacob, were spending their Saturday helping Tommy's grandfather, Richard, with his alfalfa fields. The day had started out like any other in the countryside, nothing out of the ordinary, until something drew them away from the center of the fields, something they couldn't quite explain. Just before 2 p.m., they wandered toward the edge of the farmland near Hoffman Road. From a distance, they spotted something unusual tucked between the weeds. At first, they thought it might be a deer, or maybe a large animal resting in the shade. But as they moved closer, the illusion faded. What they saw stopped them cold. They turned and sprinted back across the field, yelling for Tommy's grandfather. Richard came quickly. One look was all it took. He picked up the phone and called for help.
Brown County 911, what is the address of your emergency?
We just found a human body laying in some weeds.
Okay, person beyond help, or do I need to give you instructions for CPR?
No, it's beyond help. It's starting to decay.
Is it a male or a female?
It's got long hair, but I didn't go near it.
When investigators from the Brown County Sheriff's Office arrived at the scene, they were immediately taken aback by what they saw. Lying face down in the thick grass was a woman, her arms and hands positioned awkwardly above her head, her feet angled toward the road. Aside from a pair of socks and a disposable pink bracelet, her body had been left uncovered. At first glance, the visible signs told a story no one wanted to hear. She had fought back, her skin covered in bruises and open wounds. Faint linear marks circled her neck, like the trace of something tightly bound. But it wasn't until the medical report came in that the true scale of what she had endured became horrifyingly clear. Over 240 distinct injuries had been found on her body, including patterned imprints on her back, suggesting she had been stepped on. Other evidence confirmed she had suffered unspeakable abuse before her final moments. Yet no object was discovered nearby. The examiner concluded that the cause of her passing was a combination of severe blunt trauma and restriction to her airway. Before detectives could even process the brutality they'd just witnessed, their radios buzzed with a new call. A man named Doug Dietrich was on the line reporting that his girlfriend, Nikki Vanderheyden, had gone missing. As Doug began to explain what had happened the night before, investigators started piecing together what now seemed undeniable. The physical description matched exactly. But more telling was the address Doug gave them. It was less than 3 miles from where they stood. From this point forward, the events would unravel into one of the most staggering cases, not only for the public, but for the investigators themselves. A case that would reinforce one truth: only the evidence can speak. And in this story, the evidence would scream to mark it as one of the most twisted cases in the country. Immediately after receiving the 911 call, an officer was dispatched to Doug's home. Doug explained that the night before he and Nikki had gone out to a local bar in Green Bay, called the Watering Hole. They were there with a group of friends for a live show by a band called Steel Panther. According to him, everything was going great, at least during the concert. But when the music stopped, things began to shift. The group they were with was larger than expected, and when the show wrapped up somewhere between 11 and 11:30, there was confusion about what to do next. Some of the group decided to head straight to another bar known as the Sardine Can. Doug, however, stayed behind at the original spot with his friend Greg to have a couple more drinks Nikki left with the others. The group split, and Doug claimed it was nothing more than a coincidence, just a small misunderstanding. But shortly after he and Greg finished their drinks, Doug's phone lit up. One message after another. Furious texts from Nikki, and Furious doesn't even come close. She accused him repeatedly of cheating. She hinted that he had stayed behind to flirt with other women. She reminded him this wasn't the first time he'd disrespected her trust. Her words came fast and sharp like daggers through the screen. When the officer reviewing the texts read through Nikki's messages, she had questions.
Calling you abusive?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know where she gets this stuff sometimes.
Is that common for her to talk that way to you when she's been drinking?
Sometimes, yeah. I mean,
or when she's sober?
She doesn't drink that often, but
okay.
All of a sudden she gets that in her head that that's what's going on.
Sure.
But more than the content, it was Doug's reaction that raised eyebrows. He claimed he didn't take the messages seriously. He brushed them off, blamed it on the drinks, said Nikki had too much that night, that she was overreacting, that there was no real reason for her to be upset. But was he unaware of how serious things were becoming? Or was this the first sign that something far deeper was unraveling? Doug continued recounting the night, saying that after a little while, he and Greg finally left the Watering Hole. They headed over to the Sardine Can, expecting to catch up with Nikki and the rest of the group. But when they got there, she was gone. He asked around and learned that Nikki had stormed out alone, still fuming after waiting for him longer than she felt she should have. Someone in the group said they tried to stop her, especially since it was late and she had clearly had too much to drink. But she snapped, said she didn't want company, just wanted to be left alone. Doug said he and Greg got into the car and drove around looking for her. He claimed he called her multiple times. At one point, she even answered. They talked for a few minutes, but according to him, her words were slurred and scattered. She refused to come back to the bar, refused to tell them where she was. After what he described as a frustrating search with no results, Doug said they gave up and headed home. Greg dropped him off. The babysitter was still there, but Nikki wasn't. Doug said he assumed she was on her way back, that nothing seemed alarming. So he checked on the baby, and by around 2:30 or 3 in the morning, he went to bed. That's where the initial conversation with Doug ended. How could he possibly go to sleep, knowing Nikki was still out there, drunk and alone? And why didn't he sound more concerned about a woman he claimed to love? The answers to those questions couldn't wait. They weren't the kind that could be left hanging overnight. So just hours after Nikki's body had been discovered, law enforcement returned to Doug's home. But this time, it wasn't for a casual chat. And it definitely wasn't just to follow up. They didn't ask him to come in. They brought him in. The first thing investigators needed to understand sounded simple, but it carried weight. Why did Doug wait so long to report Nikki missing? Sure, maybe he thought she'd come home while he slept. But what about the next morning? What was he doing all that time? Doug told them he had spent most of the day at home trying to shake off a hangover while caring for their infant son. He explained that the reason he didn't call police right away was because this wasn't the first time Nikki had stormed off after a drunken argument. Nothing bad had ever come of it before, so he assumed this time would be no different. He told himself she was just upset, that maybe she was crashing at a friend's place for the night. But as the hours passed, and he began reaching out to people close to her, he realized no one had heard from her. Not one person. And that's when he said, real worry started to set in. At that point, detectives decided it was time to stop circling around the truth. They told Doug what they had. The news had already hit the local channels by 10 p.m. A woman's body had been discovered in a Bellevue field, and now it was just a matter of time before either Doug or Nikki's family heard what everyone else already suspected.
Well, I think what we're looking at is this body that was found down the street. I don't think it's been 100% identified as her, but there's a lot of similarities.
What happened?
Well, I don't know.
That's what we're trying to figure out here.
That's what we don't know.
Is there anything else that you can think of that would be helpful to us in this?
I'm going to talk to everybody on that frickin' street and in that neighborhood. I need to do it.
They told him plainly. Based on the evidence so far, they strongly believed the body was Nikki's. Doug looked shattered when they told him. He said he was willing to do anything to help find the person responsible. He wanted justice. His emotions seemed real. And for a moment, investigators felt that maybe all their doubts, all their questions had been misplaced. Or at least that's how it felt in those few minutes. Because while they were still sitting with Doug, in the very same room, at that exact time, a message came through. A patrol unit had just reported something, and it was about to change everything. Not because it pointed to Doug as a suspect, but because it would speed up the entire search. And in that rush, new clues would surface. Clues that would bury the most unexpected twist. A twist pulled straight out of a movie, only this time it was real. Roughly half a mile from the field, along a stretch of interstate, 172 officers found a disturbing trail of belongings. Clothes stained with blood, and several personal items were scattered by the side of the road near an entrance ramp. The clothes matched what Nikki had been wearing on the night of May 20th. And there was more. Her phone was there. So was her keychain. And dangling from that keychain was an ID badge from Green Bay School District. It was hers, no question anymore. Detectives now believed whoever had taken her life tried to get rid of her belongings by tossing them out of a moving car on the highway. All items were carefully collected, sealed, and sent off for testing. At the same time, the search for answers moved to two other locations. First was the sardine can, the last known place Nikki had been seen alive. Investigators hoped that by retrieving surveillance footage from the bar and the surrounding area, they might be able to retrace her steps and uncover what really happened during those final moments. The second location, Doug Dietari's home. When detectives reviewed the bar's surveillance footage, they confirmed it. Nikki had been there that night. She'd left the bar alone. Moments later, one of Doug's friends was seen following her outside, trying to convince her to wait, to just hold on until Doug arrived. But after a short attempt, the friend returned alone. That was the last recorded sighting of Nikki. Unfortunately, the area she walked into had no security cameras. It was a blind zone. Investigators were already planning to shift their focus to Doug's home. But just as they were about to leave the surveillance room, one of them caught something. On one of the cameras inside the bar, Doug appeared again. He was laughing, sitting with a friend like nothing was wrong. They rewound the footage, and that's when things began to unravel completely. Doug and his friend had spent maybe 10 minutes looking for Nikki, then returned to the bar and stayed there, which directly contradicted what Doug had told police earlier. He'd claimed he drove around for a long time looking for her, that he was worried and desperate to find her. But now that story was starting to collapse. Even after reviewing the footage from the bar, investigators were still trying to justify Doug's statements. After all, he'd been drinking heavily too, and maybe he couldn't remember exactly how long he searched for Nikki. That kind of confusion, it wasn't impossible. But if there was one place that could reveal the truth, whether Doug was genuinely lost in the chaos or lying from the very beginning, it was the home he and Nikki shared. When investigators first stepped inside the house, everything looked normal. They walked through the front door, and at a glance, nothing seemed out of place. But what they didn't know was that the moment they stepped into the garage, they'd be walking straight into one of the biggest twists they'd ever seen. It all started with faint bloodstains on the floor. But these weren't just stains. They were smears. The kind that suggested something had been dragged across the concrete. And those smears led directly to where Nikki's car had been parked. When they searched the vehicle, they found more blood inside. Back inside the house, they discovered traces of blood in one of the bathrooms. Not a large amount, but just enough to raise serious suspicion. Blood on tissues, blood on a sweatshirt, and then a pair of men's shoes. The soles had a wavy tread pattern, eerily similar to the marks found on Nikki's body. And on those soles, investigators found tiny red specks, possibly blood. With every new discovery, they were growing more certain. The man sitting in the station wasn't just a witness, he was the prime suspect, and this was turning into one of the fastest-moving murder cases they'd ever worked. But just as things were closing in, someone unexpected approached the house. Doug and Nikki's neighbor. He had something to say, and it would confirm everything. He'd been out mowing the lawn when he spotted large bloodstains near the curb, and right beside them, a thin wire. It looked like a phone charger. That was enough for detectives to draw a chilling conclusion. This right here, just 120 feet from Doug's front door, was the primary crime scene. And that wire, it might be the murder weapon. All evidence was sent to the lab for testing, but at that moment, Doug was still free. He hadn't been formally charged yet. That changed the moment detectives started piecing together Nikki's final hours. They believed Doug came home from the bar in the early hours of May 21st, told the babysitter she could leave, and when Nikki returned shortly after a fight broke out, one that escalated and ended in tragedy. Doug, in a fit of rage, strangled her as she tried to escape. He then dragged her body into the garage, placed it in her own car. His was still at the bar, and drove 3 miles to dump her in an open field. Along the highway, he scattered her clothes and belongings, then returned home, cleaned the car, the bathroom, and himself. That's why blood was found in the garage, the car, and the bathroom. As for motive, there had been tension, fights, but detectives needed more. They spoke to the couple's friends, those who were out with them that night. All of them said Nikki was in high spirits. It had been nearly a year since she and Doug had gone out together since having the baby. She was happy. Doug, however, wasn't. Especially after drinking, he seemed distant, cold. One friend recalled being next to Nikki when she tried to call Doug after arriving at the sardine can bar. All her calls went to voicemail. But when the friend tried calling Doug from her own phone, it rang. That's when Nikki realized he was ignoring her, and she stormed out of the bar, furious. Suddenly, it all made sense. Doug wasn't the loving boyfriend. He was avoiding her, and all those messages Nikki sent that night, they weren't drunk ramblings. They were cries for help. Now, with witness statements backing the theory, investigators had just one thing left to be done.
Right now, I'm going to be taking you into custody. I'll be handcuffing you. I'll explain all that to you in a bit, and transporting you down to the sheriff's department. Okay?
Okay.
So just be cooperative with me,
all right,
and we'll roll it that way.
Wow, okay.
All right. I'm going to get you down there, and we'll talk down there, and I'll kind of explain to you what's going on. I'm a decent guy.
Okay, I'm a decent guy too.
I get that. I'm sure you are.
After Doug was taken into custody, investigators began preparing the case files. To them, everything was nearly complete. All that was missing was the forensic lab results. But even without those, they were 99% certain that the evidence would only confirm what they already knew, especially after they searched Doug's phone and found damning messages. Texts to his mother. He told her he suddenly found himself tied down, a father, trapped in a life he didn't want, and that he planned to leave Nikki as soon as he sold the house. To the investigators, this wasn't just a theory anymore. It was the truth. They believed they had their killer, and that belief led to the official announcement.
Ledgeview man is charged with murdering his girlfriend, 34-year-old Douglas Dietrich, now facing first-degree intentional homicide for the death of Nicole Vanderheyden. You remember Nicole's body was found in a ditch Saturday. Investigators later found blood in the home the couple shared in Ledgeview.
Doug Dietrich had been arrested as the prime suspect in the murder of Nikki Vanderheyden. The news exploded across local and national media. The story of a mother killed by the wealthy boyfriend who couldn't handle responsibility captured everyone's attention. People wanted to know more about the woman behind the headlines. Her name was Nicole Vanderheyden. She was 31 years old and lived in Wisconsin, a devoted mother of 3, Michaela, Tyler, and Dylan. She had married her high school sweetheart, Brian, shortly after graduation. But over time, they grew apart and divorced amicably. Determined to provide a better future for her children, Nikki returned to school, earning a dual degree in science and education from the University of Wisconsin-Green Bay in 2010. She worked as a substitute teacher in the public school system, specializing in science for elementary and middle school students, a job she loved deeply. Nikki was full of life, energetic, adventurous. She loved taking her kids on trips. She embraced motherhood with joy and built a happy life surrounded by family and friends. But everything changed in January 2015. That's when she met Doug Dietrich at a bar. There was instant chemistry. They began dating quickly. Doug came from a wealthy family who owned a successful construction company. He was drawn to Nikki's warmth, her spontaneity. She encouraged him to live healthier, gifted him a Fitbit to help him track his progress. Just weeks into their relationship, Nikki discovered she was pregnant. They agreed to raise the child together. She and her 2 children, Michaela and Tyler, moved into Doug's home in Ledgeview, and in October 2015, their son Dylan was born. From the outside, it looked like a happy family, but inside cracks were starting to show. While the public was still reeling from the story of a mother murdered by her boyfriend, nearly 17 days after Doug Dietrich's arrest, the forensic lab results finally came in. And they were nothing like anyone expected. The blood in Nikki's car. It didn't belong to her. It belonged to her daughter from an unrelated, non-criminal incident. The blood found in the bathroom, the tissues, the sweatshirt, that wasn't Nikki's either. It belonged to her sister, Heather, from a past nosebleed. The bloodstains in the garage? Yes, they were blood but not human. Turns out Doug was an avid hunter, and he'd recently gone turkey hunting a few weeks before. And the shoes? There wasn't any blood on them at all. When forensic techs compared the tread pattern to the marks on Nikki's body, they found the print was not enough for a solid match. But outside the house, the evidence still told a different story. The blood found on the sidewalk? That was Nikki's, and the thin wire nearby, what looked like a phone charger, carried Nikki's DNA, along with a partial male profile. But that male profile didn't match Doug Dietrich. In a single moment, the case collapsed. Everything investigators had built unraveled. Doug, while maybe distant or even emotionally detached, wasn't the killer. After 18 days in custody, Doug Dietrich was released, and it was announced to the public the real killer was still out there. But this time, the investigation wouldn't start at the bar. Detectives were now certain Nikki did make it home. The challenge? No cameras had captured her route, and the male DNA found on the wire, it was too degraded to be submitted to CODIS. What once seemed like a solved case had suddenly turned cold. Or so they thought, because one piece of evidence was still being processed. Nikki's sock recovered near the body contained a clear DNA profile. When compared to the partial sample from the wire, it was a match. The full profile was submitted into CODIS. And the result? A new name? A name no one expected. George Stephen Birch. A name investigators had never heard before. He was 38 years old. And when they dug into his background, the story took a darker turn. George Birch had a long criminal record, mostly burglary and breaking and entering. But even more disturbing, this wasn't his first brush with a murder case. Back in 1998, he'd been charged in a fatal shooting, but was acquitted. Still, that detail wasn't easy to ignore. And neither was this before the murder. George had relocated to Wisconsin. He'd been staying with an old friend and his wife, Ed and Linda Jackson. Their home. It was less than a mile from the bar district where Nikki was last seen alive. But the real turning point came from a different case entirely. Not long after Nikki's murder, Green Bay police were investigating a hit and run involving a Chevy Blazer. The vehicle had been abandoned and partially burned. It was registered to Ed Jackson, but he had lent it to George at the time. When asked about it, George claimed the vehicle had been stolen. When investigators sat down with George, he voluntarily handed over his phone, including access to his Google GPS data, a digital breadcrumb trail of everywhere he'd been. When Brown County investigators reviewed that data, they were stunned. George's GPS history lined up perfectly with every critical location in Nikki's murder, from the sardine can, where he left around 2:30 a.m., to Ed and Linda's home, then straight to Doug and Nikki's house, where he remained outside for 40 to 50 minutes. From there, he drove to the field in Bellevue, the very spot where Nikki's body was later found. Then he drove down Highway 172, the same stretch where Nikki's clothes and belongings had been scattered. Finally, he returned to Ed and Linda's home just before 4:30 a.m. And there was more. George's internet history showed he'd been obsessively following Nicky's case. He searched dozens of local news stories. Investigators now had a new theory. In the early morning hours of May 21st, George Birch had either seen Nicky walking alone or had met her in another bar. He offered her a ride. She agreed, not knowing she was stepping into a nightmare. When he made unwanted advances and she rejected him, he snapped. He attacked her. As all this evidence came together, investigators placed George under surveillance. On September 7, 2016, George Stephen Birch was arrested and charged with the murder of Nicky Vanderheyden. When the trial began in February 2018, Nicky's family faced one of the most emotionally exhausting chapters of their lives. For nearly 2 years, they had lived through confusion, heartbreak, and the wrongful suspicion aimed at her boyfriend. But just when they thought the truth was finally on the table, George Birch's defense attorneys dropped a bombshell. They turned the early suspicions against Doug into their own weapon. And George? He told a story no one saw coming. He claimed he met Nicky after she left the bar. According to him, they got into his car, decided to spend time together, and drove to her house. But when they saw the babysitter was still there, they parked nearby and stayed in the car. Then out of nowhere, he said he was struck on the head. When he regained consciousness, Doug Dietrich was standing over him with a gun. Nicky's body was lying next to the car. George claimed Doug forced him, at gunpoint, to dispose of the body, drive off with her car, and scatter her belongings all to frame him. And the reason he didn't go to the police? Because he was on probation and didn't want to get involved. But no one bought that story. Not the jury, not the prosecution, not even the media. There was one simple question George couldn't answer. If Doug was the real killer, why was George's DNA the only profile on the murder weapon? And why wasn't there a single trace of Doug anywhere near it? His version also ignored the reality of Nicky's life. She was a nursing mother, highly unlikely to be out looking for a spontaneous encounter, and logistically, the story didn't add up. George stood at 6'7". The idea of an encounter in the backseat of a parked car outside Nicky's home at 3 a.m. didn't make sense. But the prosecution wasn't done. They had one final piece of evidence that would crush every last doubt. Doug's Fitbit, the very same device Nicky had gifted him. It recorded his movement during the night of the murder, and it showed just 12 to 18 steps between 3 a.m. and 6:30 a.m. That data aligned perfectly with his statement, that he had been asleep at home with their child. There was no way he could have committed the murder. The jury took only 4 hours to deliberate. George Birch was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Doug Dietrich was officially cleared, but despite being legally exonerated, Doug's life never truly returned to normal. Just 9 months later, he was back in the headlines. This time, for something else. He was arrested for trapping Nicky's sister, Heather, inside his car, refusing to let her out after making unwanted advances. He drove recklessly, blew through red lights, and ignored her screams until she began kicking the window to escape. Doug faced formal charges and admitted partially to the incident. And while he wasn't Nicky's killer, his actions left a permanent stain. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more true crime documentaries. See you in the next video.